The day.
Hey guys, it's Alec, Torelli, and welcome back to an episode of The Hand of the Day. Mixing it up here with my content, trying to deliver you guys awesome, fresh, new ideas. This was a recommendation from a few of my readers to review high-stakes poker hands that are fun and that everyone talks about and give you guys my thoughts on them. So instead of taking questions from readers, which I promise I will continue doing in future episodes, or hands that I played myself on games like Poker Night in America or big games that I played in Macau, I'm going to take hands that are famous on the internet and review a few of them for you guys here for my hand of the day. Brought to you by 888 Poker. Today's hand is an awesome one between Doyle Negreanu and Gus Hansen. I'm sure you guys have seen this one before. Epic, massive hand, the biggest hand at the time in history on high-stakes poker, and we're going to analyze it here on the channel. So Gus Hansen raises 2,100, and Negreanu makes a very, very small 3-bet in position to 5,000. Gus Hansen calls out of position, and we go heads up to the flop. So before we go on to the flop, which massive flop in this hand, let's talk about the play pre-flop first. When you're playing really, really deep stack high stakes poker, it doesn't really matter if it's high stakes or low stakes, but when you're playing really, really deep stack poker, it's like small pocket pairs are like one of the hands that are the most important to understand how they change depending on your stack to pot ratio. So the deeper the stacks are, like the more that these hands become either problematic or possibly beneficial to play. So when have like 100, when you're too shallow, when you have like 30, 40 big blinds, you're not getting enough implied odds to call with small pairs to hit a set because you don't recover the money that you invest pre-flop often enough. When you get to like middle stack sizes, something like 100 to 200, maybe at the most big blinds, these hands go up in value because the times that you do hit a set, you can confidently put all your money in post-flop and bust an overpair, or there's enough hands that your opponent could have that's worse than yours that he's going to stack off with post-flop. When you get really, really deep, like we are in this hand, like 300, 400, 500 big blinds or deeper, like you see in some cash games wherever in the world, these hands go down in value again because the times that you put in all your money post-flop, you're up against a higher set or a hand that dominates yours, like a straight or something like that. So there's times to play these hands, they're small pocket pairs, and they're in the middle of the spectrum. They're not on the ends of the spectrum. When you're too shallow, you can't play them profitably. When you're too deep, it's problematic. So you don't want to be in a spot post-flop when you're too deep, where you flop a set and then you have to play it like as a bluff catcher or play it for pot control because you're too scared that your opponent is going to have a higher set. So that's something to keep in mind throughout this video. That's like a conceptual piece of advice that I will give you guys. There's a lot more that goes into these analysis than just the specific hands you have. I'd like you guys to take away advice from this for how to play in these situations when you find yourself in them, because you're not going to be in a spot like this one where you go full house to quads. It doesn't happen that often. So anyway, we go heads up to the flop. I think as played, like given that you're going to raise pre-flop with 2 5s in early position, which again may or may not be a good play depending on like who's in the big blind and what you know about your table, etc. It's fine to call a 3-bet here out of position. You're calling a very, very small amount of money, and you have to call once you raise. Negreanu to 3-bet and isolate with 6s is actually not a bad play. I like his 3-bet more than I like Gus's open. And I like that because like he disguises his hand, he could represent some overcards, and like he gives himself a chance to play the pot heads up in position, which is good against a really loose aggressive player like Gus. The problem is if he calls and then like other people are left at the table behind him. If you see in this hand, Antonio Esfandiari actually folded ace-queen. Like if Negreanu just called, Antonio might have 3-bet, and then it's much harder for Daniel to win the hand when he's playing his hand for value and he doesn't have the lead. So I like 3-betting here. If I'm Daniel, I probably would have 3-bet a little bit bigger. I would have made it like 8,000, but anyway, 3-betting's fine. We go heads up to the flop. Massive flop for both players, 9-6-5 rainbow. So Gus has a pretty standard check here. I think he's going to check with most of his range. Pretty normal. Pot's 12,000. Gus checks, and Negreanu makes an instant c-bet of 8,000. I think Negreanu's going to be c-betting here a lot of the time, so 8,000 is fine. 3/4 pot, nothing really to be said about it. He's going to be betting here with overpairs, betting here with some bluffs, betting here with some like 6-7 combos, some 9x combos, whatever. But now Gus Hansen check raises this flop. So when I have middle set here and I get check raised, like, I just don't expect this spot. I expect Gus to be loose in this spot, and I expect Gus to continue with all of his equity. But when you're really, really deep stacked out of position, like, I don't know how often Gus is check raising here with like bluffs. And by bluffs, I mean hands that have equity, but that like are worse than a set or a straight. So like maybe Gus is gonna check raise with something like 9-8 instead of check call with it to try and get his opponent to fold 2 aces right away on the flop, and then like he has like some equity if he's called. Maybe he has a backdoor flush draw, he has a gut shot straight draw, you get a 2 pair. I don't mind check raising with something like 9-8. I don't know how often Gus is gonna check raise with something like Jack 10 suited. Like I just don't really see that happening. I don't know the dynamics of this game. I don't know any of the history between the players at this table. But I'm just talking about reading the hand in a vacuum, getting check raised in a spot like this. When I'm Negreanu, I'm like, I like my hand with middle set, but like, if your opponent's never bluffing, which some players aren't, and I know that's kind of extreme, like a player like Gus is bluffing here, but like he's only representing sets and straights here for value. Like I don't think he has really many 2 pairs. You have 2 6s, so you block. There's only like one combination of 6-5 suited. So like he doesn't have that many hands that are worse than yours, except the set of 5s if he's check raising for value. So the key thing to keep in mind here, like proceeding in the hand when you're Daniel, is thinking about like, what hands is Gus going to play that are worse than mine? And you're basically hoping that he's bluffing. Because if he's not bluffing, he either has a higher set, a lower set, so 50-50, or a straight. And there's like 4 combinations of straights. So he's more likely he has you beat than you have him beat if he's not bluffing. I also don't know how often Gus is going to check raise with something like ace-7 suited. He probably is going to check call with that hand. I agree he's going to put money in the pot. I just don't know how often he's going to check raise. So I would be like, fine to continue with Daniel. I'm not going to fold my hand. I'm not like super loving my hand. I would definitely never do something like 3-bet the flop here with Daniel. Calling here if you're Daniel is totally standard. I would be calling with my entire range here on the flop that is going to continue with the hand, a set included. So I like Daniel's call here. So far the flop is totally standard. That's fine. Gus check raise is fine here with a set. We go to the turn. Turn is a very, very sick card. It comes a 5. So now Gus, was drawing pretty much dead, and now Daniel's drawing pretty much dead. Gus bets 24,000, which is smaller than the bet he made on the flop. I know there's not supposed to be bet sizing tells amongst great players, but in a spot like this, I think betting really, really small is sort of awkward. Like, I think in this spot, it's really, really unlikely that Gus is bluffing. If he's bluffing, I think he's gonna either check or bet bigger. It doesn't really make sense to bluff with a really small bet size when your opponent called the check raise on the flop and he pretty much has no folding range, okay? So it's really important to keep that in mind. If Daniel called the check raise on the flop here, he's never folding to a bet of 24,000 into a pot of like 65-70,000, right? He's just never, ever, ever folding. So to bluff here, if you're Gus, when you're out of position, when Daniel showed a ton of strength, right? Like Daniel's range is like, it's really likely that Daniel has an overpair if you're thinking about this hand, like at the worst. So it's impossible to think he's gonna fold for 24,000. So I would hate Gus's hand if he was bluffing here. And so like this makes me think that he just doesn't have hands like 9-8. Like maybe he has 9-8 and now he's like betting to sort of like block bet. He doesn't want to check call the turn. He doesn't know what to do. Like maybe he has the best hand in some like really ambitious scenario. So maybe that's like the one bluff that he could have, something like 9-8. But like Gus is just never bluffing here. So if I'm Daniel, I'm calling, of course, but like now, okay, like there's more likely that your hand is good. Obviously, there's only one combination of quads, and there's only 3 combinations of 9s full, and there's still 4 combinations of straights that your opponent could have. So I think in this spot, like I'm Daniel, I'm loving my hand a lot more because it's like, obvious reasons, right? Like there's less combinations of hands that beat you, and there's more combinations of hands that you beat. So even though that pocket 5s improved to quads, you improved over a string. So now it's like 50-50 that you have the best hand if he's not bluffing, as opposed to before where it was more likely that Gus had the best hand. So I would still call here. I would be calling with my whole range. Again, I would never raise this spot. You're in position. You could raise the river if you decide that there's value in that, if Gus bets. So I would never have a raising range here. I would call with 6s full if I'm Daniel. I would call with 9s full. I would call with quads. I'd call with a straight. I'd call with an overpair. I would never, ever, ever raise this turn. There's no reason to ever raise this turn. So Daniel calls, and we go heads up to the river. So now the river comes in offsuit 8, and Gus decides to check. So if I'm Daniel here, I'm gonna bet. He bets half the pot, which I think is fine. Gus, like, probably is gonna check a straight here, and he's probably gonna check call with that. But the 8 is like sort of a bad card because there's less combinations of straights now. So Gus can only have 3 combinations of 8-7 suited, right? Because now there's an 8 on the board that blocks it. So now there's like slightly more combinations of 9s full and 5s full than there is of 8-7. Gus could also have 6-5, which I didn't mention. There's one combination of that. So there are still more hands you beat than hands that beat you, and I think you have to value bet 6 full here. It's like 2 loose to check. Gus, especially against Gus, who's like known to be a little bit of a station. He's definitely going to call here if he has a straight. Maybe he has some crazy bluff like 8-7 or 9-7, and then he's just going to check call with it. Maybe he has 6-7. Maybe Gus has like 5-7. So you definitely have to bet here. It's a trivial bet for half pot. But now Gus check raises all in, right? So now Daniel has to call 175 more to win a pot of 400,000. So he's basically getting like a little bit better than 2-1, right? So he has to be right, let's say like 30% of the time, to do some rough math. Again, I talk a lot more about this on my blog, alectorelli.com. Link below this video. I go through all the math and all the post-analysis review that I do after every single poker hand, every single poker session that I play to review high-stakes hands like these. And I give you guys all the math breakdown if you're interested in more of that. Check it out. But in short, in this spot, we basically have to be right 30% of the time, right? So we have to hope that Gus, in order to justify calling profitably, Gus has to be bluffing enough of the time that we're right 30%. So is Gus bluffing here? What hands could Gus be bluffing with? Is it even conceivable that he's bluffing? And can we give him enough combinations of bluffs to outweigh his value betting hands? So first let's talk about the hands that Gus is going to play this way. I don't think that Gus could really have 6-5, okay? Like I think 6-5 is eliminated from Gus's range. I don't think his hand, he check raises for value with 6-5. I think if he has 6-5, he just bets the river, or like 8-5, if he has like, somehow he has 8-5. I don't think he goes for a check raise on the river here because he's like almost over-repping his hand. Like Daniel is tanking with a hand better than 6-5. So Daniel is never, ever, ever gonna call with worse if Gus has 6-5. So if you have 6-5 here and you're Gus, you're overplaying your hand, right? You're like almost bluffing, but like you don't even know what you're doing. Your hand is like somewhere in the middle. Like you're never getting called by worse. You're only getting called by better. Your hand is too strong to check raise. You should just bet if you have 6-5 and hope to get called by worse, like a straight. So Gus never has 6-5, he never has 8-5. So what is Gus's range here for value? Gus also never has a straight, right? Like it's obviously impossible. So Gus has 9s full or quads. Like those are the only 2 hands Gus has. Like he never has pocket 8s. I think that's like impossible. He would check call the flop. He would never bet the turn. Like, he just never has that hand. So he has 3 combinations of 9s full and 1 combination of 5s, right? He has 4 combinations of hands for value, right? Keep that in mind, 4 combinations. Now we have to think about like, is there enough bluffs that we could give Gus that will mean he is bluffing 30% of the time? So is there like we need there to be at least 2 bluff combinations for Gus, right? He needs to be bluffing here at least with 2 combinations of hands so that his bluffs equate to 1/3 of the hands he's playing this way, right? So we need 2 combinations of bluffs, which isn't a lot, right? Like he basically, to keep how small 2 combinations is in perspective, if Gus is ever bluffing here, we kind of have to call it for Daniel. Now, let's talk about Daniel's range here for a second to see if you could profitably fold 6s full. Like, are you too exploitable if you're folding 6s full? I don't know if this is like super relevant, just because in spots like these, I don't think people are like getting super out of line, and I don't think you're being exploited too often in massive live high stakes poker hands like these. I understand from a game theory point it's important, and of course you never want to be too exploitable by folding the best hand you could have, otherwise your opponents could bluff you. Like I know that's the game theory logic, but that just like doesn't happen in practice on high stakes poker television games. I've played a lot of them, and it just doesn't really happen when people are playing these size games. So I don't think it's like super relevant that you're folding one of the best hands you could have, because I just don't think you're ever getting exploited here. So I don't think that argument is like super relevant. I think what's important is to figure out, is Gus bluffing at all here? Can Gus ever be bluffing? I think that even though he only has to be bluffing with 2 combos to justify calling, I think the answer is no. I'm trying not to say this in hindsight because I've seen the hand and like it's been analyzed a lot, and like I'm like watching the cards and I get like, you know, hindsight's 20/20, or I'm not trying to sound like a genius or a magician, but I just think that like this is a spot where Daniel's range looks so friggin' strong that the worst hand Daniel could have is a straight, and I honestly think Daniel would check the river with a straight. Even, I know poker was played differently like 4 or 5 years ago when this hand happened, people were less advanced in hand reading, but I just don't think, like, Daniel's a very good player, he's very observant, he's good at hand reading. I don't think he's ever betting this river with a straight. He's never getting called by worse, he's not getting his opponent to fold a chop, and his hand looks so strong that he almost looks like he has a boat when he bets the river, right? Like, he would never bet with an overpair. He's never calling a check raise on the flop without at least an overpair or a set or a straight. He's never calling the turn without an overpair, a set, or a straight. And he's never betting the river with an overpair or a straight. So he's only betting the river with full houses. And I just don't think like Gus needs to ever be bluffing here to get him to fold a full house on the river. Daniel never has any bluffs. Like, maybe Daniel has something like 9, 10, and he's gonna like turn it into a bluff on the river, but like, why? What's he hoping that he's gonna like get Gus to fold something better, like a straight? I mean, it's just too ambitious, and it doesn't make sense with his bet sizing. His bet sizing looks like he wants to get called. So I just don't see Negreanu ever bluffing, and I don't see Negreanu having anything but a full house. I know that sounds ridiculous, and hand ranges are very, very, very narrow, but there are situations in poker when like you can deduce your opponent's hands to such a finite point that like you can make very, very big layouts. You might have seen some of the videos I've done that with, where I'm like, oh, well, this is how I analyze the hand to understand exactly what my opponent had. So I don't think that Gus ever needs to be bluffing here, and I also don't think Gus is ever going to try to get Negreanu to full house, which is very, very likely he has. Even if Gus isn't thinking on the level that we're talking about here, or he didn't have time to talk about all the stuff that we talked about in this video, it's very intuitive to a player that's played a lot of poker that like Daniel's hand looks massive in this spot, and people don't try and get people to fold massive, massive hands. Some of the time they do, but not often. So I don't think Gus is ever bluffing here, and I think he's always check raising with 9s full or quads. That's pretty much like the only thing he has. And so I would probably lay this down if I was Daniel. This is the best hand I would fold. I would call with 8s full if I had it, because my opponent could have 6s full or maybe 6-5. So I would call with 8s full or better. I think I would fold 6s full here.
I asked Gus about the hand later, and he thought, well, you were more likely to bet than you were to call a bet on the river. He was wrong, but as it worked out, he got the wrong read, but the right result, and busted me for almost $300,000 on the hand when he turned over 4 of a kind pocket 5s.
I've actually been at a few spots like these in massive hands that I played in Macau. Some of the hands that you guys have seen on Poker Night in America, where I've been able to take advantage of spots like these and make massive, massive folds. So I really am not saying this just like because I see the results. And I'll try and share with you guys a few more of those hands I played in Macau to show you guys some of the more deeper ways you can think about poker in very specific spots like these. I hope you enjoyed this hand of the day. Please subscribe to my channel. Really appreciate it. Share it with someone that you think would benefit from this hand. If you guys have hands you'd like me to review, whether they're like high stakes hands on the internet or hands that you guys play yourselves or whatever, please send them to me through my blog, alectorelli.com. Click on poker, submit your hands, and you can send them all to me there. That's it, guys, and I will see you next week for the hand of the day. Thanks for watching. Cheers.